Heavenly Father, as we come before you with this previous week, let us humble ourselves and lay it at your feet as we prepare to hear what you have to say for us, Lord, that you can be placing your Spirit on our hearts, that you can be working within us, that the words that we hear can have an impact the way that you want them to, Lord, that they can speak to us how you would like them to speak to us, Lord. We pray this in your name. Amen. Now, I took the liberty this week of going on a walk, which is not something I do very often. I'm not the most active person in the world. I enjoy swimming, but walking is not my strong suit. And as I was on this walk, I was reflecting on my childhood a little bit. My family was very active. We were massive campers. We travelled the whole way around Australia in like a tent, basically. And it was great as a kid, and we went on a lot of hikes. We'd hike everywhere. Every time we'd go stay somewhere, we'd find a hike to go on. I lived in Darwin. We hiked like all of Darwin, and I always hated it. I was like, this is the worst. I'd walk up like all these rocks, just be like, oh, this is boring. I'd get to the bottom, we'd be at the bottom, and I'd be in the car park, I'd be like, Mum and Dad, I don't want to go on another hike. I was 6, I was tired, my legs were sore. And the whole walk up was like, oh, this is the worst part of my life. Why are we doing this? Maybe I could have been born to a different family where I could just sit at home all day. This is awful. And then we get to the top. And it was always like the most gorgeous view in like the entire world. It was absolutely phenomenal. It would blow me away every time. And I probably couldn't see very far because I was like 6, but Dad would lift me up, or I'd like stand on a rock or something and just look out at everything. And it was always amazing. And then the way back down was always really nice because it was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get back to the car and it's gonna be great and we don't have to do this for another 24 hours. But I'd get to, reflect on what we looked at, and we'd always talk about, the way up, we'd just have like mundane conversation, like, are we there yet? How much longer? On the way back down, we'd be like, that was beautiful. Do you remember this other hike we went on in this other gorge? And that was really nice. And we'd just reflect on all the walks we'd been on recently. And it's something I still like to do. As much as I don't enjoy it, I really like to be intentional in my life, to be like, okay, you know what, I'm going to take a moment, I'm going to go on a walk. My favourite walk ever, for any of you that like walking, is the Newman's Nursery Walk in Anstey's Hill. That's one that we live just around the corner from that, and so we do that walk a lot. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's only like 20 minutes, so I highly recommend that one if you do like walking. I enjoy it, and I don't like walking. But these walks for me are always a really reflective process. I don't know those of you that, go on walks very often, but when I take the time to go on a walk, I really sit in what's going on. I have the opportunity to think about everything. Sometimes I'll put music on, sometimes I'll just walk in the silence and the noises of nature, and it's just something I really like to reflect on. Now, sometimes it's walking in a park, sometimes it's hiking up a mountain. But hiking up a mountain, I think, is a much more pleasant experience than walking in a park. Because walking in a park, it doesn't really cost you anything. It's nice and flat and all is well, and there's other people around. But you have to be really intentional about going on a hike. Now, we talk about this concept in faith a lot, about mountains in faith. Now, I'm sure this isn't a new concept to most of you, how you have the top of the mountain and these mountaintop experiences, and then you have moments in the valley of doubt and whatever. Now, this is something that we're taught about a lot, but for those of you who don't know, we kind of refer in faith to being at the top of a mountain, a place where you're having this really big encounter with God. A mountaintop experience in your faith might look like the time when you recognize the love that God has for you and the overwhelming love of God in the world. This is a lot of the time where people solidify their faith, where they recognize what God is doing in their work, in their worlds, and they decide to follow Jesus. Maybe you're seeing calling in your life. Maybe you see revelation. Maybe you're just sitting in the peace that God is. And we have these mountaintop experiences because it gives us a reason to take God into the valley with us. Now we go from the top of a mountain down into a valley. and we talk about these experiences and these periods and seasons of life when we're walking through the valley. And it's a really low time in your life. It might look like doubt or fear creeping in. You're struggling to see God and how he might be working in your life. Now, this is a bit harder to concept why we have these valley experiences, these really low experiences in our journey of faith with God. Now, but these give us a reason to remember God's provision. And for those of you who've been in a season in the valley before, you're like, this is awful, I don't want to be here, maybe God's not even real, whatever you've thought in that season. When you come out of that, you're like, I learned so much more then than I realized I was learning. And so we have these moments in life where God is working for us and fighting for us more than we can even understand. And we don't necessarily see it in that moment, but we can recognize it when we come out of that. Now, when we go on a walk in life, on a hike, you're going from one destination to the next, right? It's a really straightforward process. You start at the bottom, you go for a walk, you end up at the top. Now, the destination is the top and the bottom. No one really thinks about the in-between. That's the place you've got to go to get to the top. And you sit in the top and you really reflect and kind of, that's like the height of it. That's like the best part of it. And then you have to walk back down to get back to your car, right? So the path from the middle to the top of the mountain is just something we have to do. But when you're going on a walk, in actuality, you spend most of your time walking, right? The exciting part of it, the reason you go is to stand at the top and look at the city and watch the sunset and see what's going on and kind of sit in the fact that you're higher than everyone and you have your own little moment and you just feel like glorified and amazing and it's great. But you spend most of your time walking. You walk up, you walk back down. Now, in our lives, we have these mountaintop experiences in faith and we have these valley experiences where we feel really trapped in the valley, and then when we get to the top of the mountain, we feel really amazing at the top of the mountain. But in actuality, we spend most of the time of our lives walking between those valley and those mountaintop experiences. When we have these really valleying, these really low experiences in faith, we don't spend our whole lives there. And the same with the mountaintop experiences. When we're at the top of a mountain, we can't be there forever. As phenomenal as it would feel to, sit in the peace and comfort and overwhelming love of God for your whole life, that's just not how it goes. Most people don't spend their entire lives standing on the top of the mountain. So we have this thing called the side of the mountain. Now, this is the really mundane in our lives. It's really hard to see God working in our lives every day when we're just walking up the mountain or we're walking down the mountain. He gets tangled in with everything else that's going on. He reveals himself here, but they're not ways we recognize. At the top of the mountain, he reveals himself in these miraculous ways. You can feel his presence and his peace, and in the valley, he's fighting for us, and we can recognize that when we come out. But on the mountaintop, it's not. On the side of the mountain, it's not overwhelming, the love of God. It's not extraordinary. It's not phenomenal. It just happens. God's presence is there, and we know his presence is there, but sometimes it's hard to see it. Life goes on every day, and so does everything else, and God can get really tangled within that. Now, we have these, while we're on the side of the mountain, it's a moment when God is calling us to reflect on what's going on. We're invited to explore new ways to meet him and to look for him in the smaller things, and the call for us to shine his light is a lot stronger. But it doesn't really feel like that. It doesn't feel extraordinary. You don't have this amazing, miraculous turnaround of faith where you're like, oh my gosh, I just want to go out and tell everyone about God every day. Because some days you don't want to. God is tangled in with the fact that you have to do the dishes, the fact that you have to go to uni. For some of you, you probably have to drop your kids at school and pick them up and go to work. And so God gets tangled in this, and it's really hard to see him when we're walking up the side of the mountain. Now, this isn't just an us thing. This was happening even in the Bible times. I want to think about the message that we heard from Numbers today. Now, when Moses was in the desert with the Israelites, they were in the valley. They were literally walking through valleys for a really long time, for 40 years. And so they walked through the valley, and then they kind of got to a plateau where they were on the side of the mountain. And then Moses went up, and he had this amazing mountaintop experience, and he got the 10 Commandments. So they've gone from the valley to the mountains really quickly. But then Moses comes back down, and he's like, face is all bright, and he's like, wow, that was amazing for a little bit, but that doesn't last the rest of the 40 years, because they then spend 40 years walking on the side of the mountains. 40 years, that's a long time. I'm not calling anyone old, don't get me wrong, that's not what I meant, but 40 years, like, I went through 12 years of school and that was enough, you know what I'm saying? And this time when they brought the bronze serpent is a time, it's right before the end of the 40 years. And so we can see that they were walking in the mundane, they were standing in the mundane for a really long time. And they were like, we don't want this manna from heaven, God. You're giving us this weird bread. We don't want it anymore. We want something real. And he's like, here's snakes that'll kill you. And so God is showing up in ways that they're not expecting. When he takes something to them, when they take something to him, he's like, you know what? I'm going to give them something they're not expecting. And it's going to be things, giving them poison. And then he goes, actually, but now I'm going to provide for you in another way. And I'm going to give you this big, shiny serpent up on a stick. And if you look at that, then you're going to be healed. Now, this echoes the gospel. This, we know that this is a metaphor for Jesus, but God's giving them a way out of the mountain, of the side of the mountain. They're sitting in the mundane of, things coming at them that they're not expecting, and life's a bit of a mess, and they're like, I don't know what's going on. And God gives them a way out, and that way out is Jesus. Now, if we have a look in Hebrews chapter 4, it says, talking about Jesus, it says, therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith that we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weakness, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are. Yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. God gives us the Bible as a reminder that he is showing up in our lives when we are just going through our lives. Most people in the Bible, they weren't on a mountaintop all the time. They weren't in the valley all the time. Now, God listens to us when we're on the side of the mountain. He's giving us opportunity to trust him, to live out his calling. And that's really exciting. We can hear these things. I can stand out here and yell at you about these things for 45 minutes. You're going to be like, that's great, that's fine and dandy. What does it mean? What does it look like in life? So I'm going to talk a little bit about what this has looked like in my life, a little bit of a testimony, and I hope that you can kind of get something out of that. Now, I experienced this, I'd call it a walk through the valley, this season of life when I was in year 12. It was 2022, there was lots going on at school, there was lots going on at home, everything was everywhere. And one day I was sitting on a bus and I was like, God's not real, what's going on? For those of you who don't know, I was my spiritual leader at the school I was going to at the time. And so that meant every week I had to get up in front of everyone and be like, God's real, come to church, chapel is amazing. And I had to do that while I was walking through this season of, I don't even know what's going on. I don't know how I can see God in my life. I don't know how he's showing up. I can't see him showing up. And it was really, really tough. Now, this started on a camp. I was on a camp called Novo. For those of you who know about camping ministry, it's something really close to my heart. It's where I've experienced a lot of really great encounters with God, but it's also times in my life where I've been really low. And so I was on camp and I had this moment. We had a big worship night one night, and I was just like, I'm done. I don't want any more to do with this God stuff. It's awful. Get it away from me. And I sat there and I cried for like 4 hours, and my best friend came and sat next to me, and he was like, Kendall, God's so real. This is amazing. I was like, you can say that all you want. How do I know? Because God wasn't showing up in my life the way that I was expecting. It wasn't miraculous. It wasn't what I wanted. Now, God pulled me out of this. And I went on the same camp last year in 2023, and I had probably one of my highest mountaintop experiences. We were in the same worship session, the same night, well, not the same night a year later. And same thing, sat and cried for like 2 hours, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like last year, except it completely wasn't, because I was like, God is amazing, and the peace that he has provided in my life is phenomenal, and what he's doing in this space is phenomenal. And so I had this really low experience for like 6 months, and then this really phenomenal, amazing, high, God is great experience. But a lot of that time was also spent just in the mundane. I came out of this valley season of like, what's going on? And I was like, you know what, God's real and this is great and I love it. But now I just have my life every day, and I understand that God's not going to show up how I want him to, but it is what it is. And then I went on camp and I had this great experience, and I was like, whoa. And then went back into the mundane, back into life, going on how it was going. And that's probably been going on for about a year. I haven't had a really miraculous experience with God for about a year, which is okay, because sometimes these things happen once a week, sometimes they happen once every 4 years. We trust God's timing. But when I've spent most of my time on the side of the mountain, it's made me really frustrated. I've been really annoyed about the fact that God isn't showing up in my life the way that I want to. And while I'm not in this really low point where I'm like full of fear and doubt of what's going on, I can still be frustrated that God isn't showing up the way that I want to. I don't know where he is. I can't see him. Now, the place that I connect most with God is in the valley seasons, in the really hard, the what's going on, because I'm frantically searching for him, right? But for some people, they connect most with God at the top of the mountain, where they're, overwhelmed by the peace of love that God is. But in the middle, I don't think anyone connects well with God. I don't think anyone just lives their day-to-day life and is like, oh my gosh, God is amazing, but it's great. Because it's just caught up. There's so much going on that we can't really see. And God shows up in the little. When I've been going through this side of the mountain experience for quite a while now, I've really had to reflect on where God is in the small things. In Lamentations chapter 3, which is one of my favorite Bible verses, Lamentations 3 says, because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning, great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait for him. There's this one word, and it's really used in the Bible, and it's surely. I'm sure you all probably think of like Psalm 23 or, in the Gospels when I say this word surely. But for those of you who did math, I did math in year 12, and they use percentages, and the one they always use to teach us 100%, that like 100% surely this is going to happen, is that the sun will rise. And so when I've been going through these side of the mountain experiences, where I've just been walking through the mundane, the day-to-day life, one way that I really remember God is working in my life is by watching the sunrise, because I know that God's showing up. He's making the sunrise, he's making the earth revolve, he's making what's happening happen. Now, I don't know where you are, whether you're at the top of the mountain, whether you're walking through the valley, whether you're sitting on the side of the mountain, but I can promise you that it's not going to last forever. Now, for those of you that are at the top of the mountain, you're going to recognize a lot. You're seeing so much that's going on, and I encourage you to hang on to that when you move into different seasons of your life. Really hang on to what God showed you when he was really present. Bask in his love, and he's going to bring you to these mountaintop experiences when we need to be brought to them. So those of you who are like, why, maybe I haven't felt God that strongly in a really long time, he'll bring you to it. You need to trust in that. Now, if you're in the bottom of the valley, the only way to the top of the mountain is up. The only way out is by going up the mountain. We can only be brought closer to God. If you're at the bottom of the valley, you need to get people around you. I encourage you to remember how God has provided, whether it was a season where you were in the valley last time, or whether it was when you were walking up the side of the mountain. Remember how he's providing for you. Take the comfort that he is fighting for you. And he'll only get you out by leaning on him, because you're not going to pull yourself out of there. Now, if you're walking the side of the valley, the side of the mountain, where life is going on, and it's one day after the next, just putting one foot in front of the other, God's transforming you to do his work. This is the place where we learn from real life experiences. Now, people in the Bible sat here too. Moses sat in this space. Jesus sat in this space. Every single person in the Bible just went about their lives, and God was showing up, but sometimes it wasn't in ways that they expect. So I encourage you to try and find God in the little. Now, while these are three really different seasons of your life, they all have one thing in common, and that's the fact that God's presence remains in a chaotic world. We have 100% assurance that the sun is going to rise, and we can remember that God's going to show up when we're not expecting him to. So to summarize, for those of you who have zoned out, I'm sure at least one of you has, remember this. When we're at the top of the mountain, these moments and opportunities where God brings us closest to him, he's revealing his love in ways we don't understand, or he's revealing his love in overwhelming ways. Really rest in that. If you're down in the bottom of the valley, remember how God is providing, remember how he provided last time, and take assurance in the fact that he is fighting for you. And if you're walking from the valley to the mountaintop, or the mountaintop to the valley, reflect on what God has done, what God's going to do, and find him in the little things. Don't underestimate his power. God is in every moment, and he transforms in different ways depending on where our lives are at. It's a journey from the bottom of the mountain to the top, and then the top of the mountain to the bottom. And at the top and at the bottom, we stop and we take it in. When we get to the bottom, we realize where we've been and what we've been through. But in the middle, we're called to just find God in every day. This journey is a journey. Life goes on, but God is our ultimate guide through it. I'm going to read Psalm 23 to you, which might be a little bit cliche, but I'm going to do it anyways. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Dear God, I ask, as we go into our weeks, that you can remind us that you're with us at every moment. Whether you're showing up in the ways that we expect you to show up, or you're showing up in small ways where we're struggling to see, Lord, I ask that you can rest on our hearts, that you can show us and remind us of the ways that you're showing up. Whether you're meeting our expectations or you're completely flipping our lives on our heads and sending us to places that we didn't want to explore, Lord. Remind us that you're our rod and our staff, and you're guiding us through these moments, and that you make space for us to meet with you, and that you are walking us beside still waters. In your name, amen.